Hi, Sean Durham here again, and making another video today more about street photography and the art of street photography. One of the things is if you look around the internet or on YouTube, you'll find many photographers who love to tell you all about the technical aspects of your camera and the best camera to buy and how big your sensor should be. Personally, I'm one of these people who's gone through life thinking, well, whatever tool I have, I'll do a good job, the best job I can. That's the way you should approach it. There's too much worry and concern about whether your camera is good enough or not. I faced this as well. Some years ago when I went digital, I firstly picked up a camera that belonged to my partner. It was a PowerShot camera for, holiday makers and tourists. It was a great little camera with 4 megapixels on it. And I went out and took photos and I thought, wow. And this is back around 2010 or 11 or earlier. But it was as I began to use it, I began to read more about photography, digital photography specifically, and then it made me think, well, what makes a good camera? And the truth is, what makes a good camera is the person using it. And the person using it is the person in action, interacting with the world around them. And that's what street photography is all about. It's what all photography is all about, all good photography. Not everything is commercial photography and how to make money from your camera. Sometimes it's really good to think in terms of how to make good photos with your camera, really good keepers. And the way to do that is have a great attitude towards what you are doing and focus on all the aspects of color, line, texture especially. Imagine right now we're in autumn, we're going into winter very soon. The way you look at the street is, according to what you see, the textures that you see on walls, on buildings, on reflections in window panes. The way people dress is very important because that changes when the weather gets colder. And later, in a few months' time, when the weather becomes milder again, you'll see that people are walking around with more a cardigan on or a pullover, and then it will go to shirt, to t-shirt, to light clothes. Everything changes, and that means textures change and lines change, the reflections change. And this is what makes great photography, is that we've got an ever-changing world around us. And so working with your camera is firstly and foremost all about how you interact with your world around you. And then you push your camera. And if you've got 4 megapixels, or if you've got 16 megapixels, or if you happen to believe you have 125 megapixels in your phone, go ahead and do your best, but make it come from you, not from the camera. Think like that. The camera is the tool. But the whole objective of taking photos is the human being in interaction with their environment, them making sense of it. It's all of the sensations that we experience through the visual aspect of life. And it's consciousness, it's how conscious we become of our environment that makes all the difference. Your camera can do that much, but you can see a lot more. You can make sense of a lot more of what you're looking at. A photographer moves through space, and that is the urban environment in which we live. And we go out and we look and we walk and we sit and we wait in a nice little corner somewhere where we think something's going to happen here and I'm going to get the shot. And while we're moving around and doing this, we're focusing, and that focus is what raises the awareness of the photographer and what we're looking at. And that is how we see the great shots. That's how we know the moment will happen anytime because of maybe a little corner on a street or the way the flow of foot traffic is happening. We can make sense of it the more focused we are on it. And focus is really raising your awareness. The more conscious we are of our environment, the better we become at taking photos. The technical aspects of it is just learning how to set the camera with your f-stop, with your ISO, with your shutter speed, according to what the light is doing at that moment and what sort of textures you're looking at. As street photographers, we're always moving in space. That is our urban environment. And it's there that our consciousness and our awareness is raised to the point where we start to see things. Because this is what photography is all about, is learning to see. It's when we become more conscious of the environment and the people we see, the objects that we see, that is what makes us better photographers. We begin to see things that other people don't see. And you might ask, how can we raise this awareness while we're out and about? Well, here's something I do very often. I revisit places that I find interesting, but I don't know why. And very often I can go to a place where I always find it very interesting, but I walk straight past because I don't consciously know why it's interesting. But it's a place where I feel well, a place that I think is nice, and I think more it's probably a nice place to live rather than take photos. But if you stop and spend time there and just observe the street around you, you begin to see things that a photographer should be able to see. That could be a little corner somewhere where there's nice architecture. You get that feeling of wellness and you want to hang out there for a while, and you watch and see things that you wouldn't normally see if you just continued walking and didn't bother to stop. I tend to find that that gives me a new place to think about when I go out to take photos. Another little tip is the idea that you should learn something about the city you live in, and not only the bigness of the city, not only the overall or overarching idea of what the city is. What I tend to find is if I read about cities generally, and if I read about what makes a good city and what makes a bad city, and then start to nail it down to what makes a good neighbourhood, what makes a bad neighbourhood, and believe you me, there's so much research on this subject of why a neighbourhood could be much better to live in than another neighbourhood. We can immediately say it's things like neglect, and over the years there's been no maintenance of streets and roads, or people say it's maybe a little bit dangerous in the area, or people say it's a boring place to live and such like. But when you read about things that aren't about photography but are about the places you visit, this helps you to raise your awareness of what makes a street vibrant, what makes a street interesting, because it's the people who live there and the people who visit that create an atmosphere. And so if the neighbourhood is really well built for people, then you tend to find it's going to be a buzzing atmosphere in the place. There's going to be interesting architecture. It's interesting how they set out the roads, the shops, everything like this. All of this makes a difference. And it helps you to understand something about why you like to hang out in a particular neighbourhood to do your street photography, rather than go down to a rough, broken area where you might just find some interesting shots, but you don't feel too good about it. Awareness, that is the platform of the artist. Doesn't matter what type of art you practice, photography, music, painting, dance, awareness of what you're doing, and not the why of why you're doing it. You do it because you're driven. But it's about what are you looking at and what does it do to you? Because, the objects, the colours, the light, the darkness, everything we look at, it creates a vibration in us that is beyond words, because that's what we're working with. It's something beyond words. It's the image, and we can make it better. So really the awareness of what you're looking at and raising that awareness and becoming more conscious of how wonderful textures are and how beautiful the colours are, or how you could possibly stand in a position where the colour and the vibrance of texture and light create a fantastic composition. That's how you create your own photos. So we could look at the same object again and again, the same corner in the city, and each and every time we look at it, if we look at it with a raised awareness, much more focused on that as a photo, as a composition, you're going to see that you could go back there again and again and again and get photos. And two things would happen, at least, and that would be that your photos would get better. You'd see more deeply into what you're looking at, and therefore you're going to actually create much better compositions. Something I do is, like I said earlier, is to go to a place where I know I feel something there, but I don't know what I should be photographing. I might go there and then just suddenly spend 20 minutes photographing corners, structures, people, You know, I like people at traffic lights. They seem to pile up and create all these sort of different forms of people, a bit like flocks of birds flying through the air. They open up, they close, they cross the street, they rush, they walk, they meander. All of this creates such a nuance of ideas that there's definitely a photo there somewhere. And you just got to be there long enough and focus on it long enough to one day take the shot and realize in the shot, when you see it in the framework of a photograph that is composed, and accidentally you pick up something that has interested you, but you did it unconsciously, and you suddenly become conscious of what it is that you are looking at. And this helps you go back and create a better photo. Another thing that we do as photographers or artists, and that is to look at people who have done what we do, but done it better. And this is a great thing because we can learn from other people's work. And like I mentioned, you can learn from reading books about cities. It gives you ideas about what you should be looking at or what you could seek. But also when we look at other photographers' work, and especially street photographers who are very creative people. For example, Harry Gruet, however you say his name, a Belgian artist that is street photographer or photographer. He loves colour. He works with the colour, and it's beautiful the way he can pick up colours in the street, and he gets those textures. He also, I believe, is probably very, very conscious of how accurate he is in depicting those colours in post-processing. There's that saturation of colour there. And if you look at his work, you'll see that it's just simply everyday life, but it is extremely attractive. And the way he frames a photo, he creates very, very complex and complicated compositions. And so wherever the frame is, it's not so obvious, but the composition is, and it's powerful. We can learn from these other photographers who we believe to be better than us and create things that help us to learn. But we shouldn't get mixed up about what we're doing when we do that. We're not trying to be like these people. We want to find our own style, our own way of looking, and that way we become stronger photographers. If we make the mistake of believing that we should be like other photographers who are better than us, then we're going to end up disappointing ourselves, because all that is an ego trip, and it's also lazy, thinking that everything's been done and so why should I bother? So I'll just try and emulate this or that particular photographer. This isn't going to work because you're not that photographer and you can't be them. You can actually learn from them and emulate them. But you'll find that through emulation, when you're out there on the street taking your own photos, you'll understand more. You become aware of things a lot more quickly. And in that way, you'll become aware of what you're doing and what you really, truly want. Don't let your ego get in your way and think that you're going to be like one of the great photographers. Much better is when you think you learn from them, but you're going to go out there and find your own thing on the street. If we try and copy them, simply slavishly copy them, what happens is we go out on the street and we don't find what they saw, because what they saw was possibly quite some many years ago. Such as one thing I see that is a difference between some of the great photographers and their photographs and this day and age out on the street is, disappointingly, shops have become very, very sort of mono in the way they present their shop fronts. It's all plastic, neon, they've got the big sign up there, they've got names that don't mean anything to anybody really, some made up name, Latin, Greek or something, and they look very, very uniform in a way. You don't see colourful metal signage, you don't see hand-painted signage, things like this, which you would have seen in somebody like Harry Gruet's photos of on the street, Coca-Cola signs, that type of thing, or Fred Herzog. You look at his Vancouver photos and you realise that it's a very different street to the modern 21st century street. So if you try and copy them and go out looking for what they did, you're going to be disappointed, because as individual photographers out there on the street doing street photography, or just simply call it artistic photography, we're out there to find out what it is we want to say with the camera. And that is the reason why it's so important to raise our awareness about what we're looking at. by informing ourselves about what we're looking at or understanding it more. And the best way to do that for a photographer really is to simply go back to the same place again and again and keep taking photos. A little bit like Cézanne, the painter, the French painter, did when he continuously painted the same mountain for about 30 years. And he produced some fantastic paintings of that mountain, the same one. He said it never got boring. It was always different each and every day. You can do that with parts of your city. There's no reason to get bored as a photographer out there on the streets looking for great compositions, interesting situations. They are there. So really it boils down to this idea of doing your own thing, and the way to do it well is to actually raise your own awareness, your consciousness about what it is you're looking at, and practice seeing, because you know the old saying is that, you know, photography is learning to see without a camera. The camera is a tool and it helps us to visualize what we're actually looking at. And we learn how to do this by composition and framing, color, texture, space, light, shadow and darkness, or shadow and light, should I say. And this is what will help us to raise our awareness. The more that we become involved in what we are looking at, instead of constantly just snap shooting, but rather think about it, look at it, then use the camera as the tool to capture what we see. That way you will become a better street photographer. That way you will become more creative. And if there's one thing a street photographer really does need, and that's creativity. And maybe have a look at the other videos, you might find them useful. Well, I hope that you practice your street photography and enjoy the autumn weather. I'm Sean Durham, bye bye.